So this is our panel discussion today, and this was, as I mentioned earlier, was the genesis of this idea was myself and Sean last year, and Lara were walking back from the cable station and said, wouldn't it be great to have a discussion with a collection of young people about the future of this country, or Ireland's place in the global world. So we deliberately set a cut-off at 34 years of age, because that was the age of Cyrus Field, that entrepreneur who started this incredible transatlantic cable, and the vision and the ambition he had, and as I said earlier, he transformed the world. So we're expecting a lot from the panel today. But just as a very quick introduction, from my left, your stage right, Kwaku Fortune, who's a young actor. Then we have Monika Dukarska, got that right? Dukarska, who is a former Olympian rower for Ireland, and currently PhD student at Munster Technology University. Then we have Shane Curran, former winner of the BT Young Scientist, and currently a CEO of a very successful Irish startup company called Evervault. Next to him is Minister Jack Chambers. Actually, when we invited Jack to this event, he was Minister of State for Transport, and now he's Minister for Finance. So we do like to think the people associated with this project do get promoted. The same happened with Norma Foley. When Norma Foley was mayor, she came to open the cable station. Now she's Minister for Education. So it's a second data point. Unfortunately, it only applies to people who visit, not to people who are actually on the foundation. It doesn't quite work. Next to the minister is Dan Hobbs, a fine-looking young man, and takes after his mother, thank God. And Dan is a co-founder and CEO of a company called ProtexAI, and he'll tell you all about that today. And Kieran, his business partner, is here as well today, so welcome, Kieran. And Dan is actually also a former winner of the Young Scientist, but the BT Bootcamp, which was the business part of the Young Scientist. So again, more BT Young Scientist legacy there. And finally, and needs no further introduction, is Her Excellency Nancy Smyth, who's our Canadian ambassador to Ireland, who's very generously given her time to this project for her many years as ambassador, and Nancy has agreed to be our moderator today. So with that, I'll hand over to Nancy.
Thanks, Leonard. We've got a great panel here today. I'd like to say that this age, application applies to me as well, but I think he's trying to make some of the other people in the audience feel better. So he clearly loosened up the rules a little bit for the case of the moderator. So this is the no pressure panel. I think you said a bit of pressure there. I think the term gets used, future leaders. I think we talk about today's leaders, because I think we've got some leaders on the stage here, and you've talked about the inspiration. And I remember that discussion at the end of the event last year, and speaking with Lara and with Sean and with some others, and hearing this idea about you. So it's great to see it in action now. And we've got the overall theme, of course, for today, which is around, and we had a wonderful keynote speaker this morning in the form of Cathal Buttimer, talking about Ireland and its role on the global stage. And of course, today we're going to hear from all of you in terms of what your perspectives are. And I guess really what motivates you. And what we're going to do is just start with kind of a round to everybody, and then I've got some specific questions for each one of you. I'm going to rely on Leonard to give me the stink eye when we start to get short on time. And so we're just going to start off, maybe just in the order that we're sitting here, and just start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, what you're working on today. Well, how did you get here? What are some of the key steps that got you here? How's that? What are some of the steps to get you here? And then if you feel up to it, is there anyone that you'd point to in Ireland or elsewhere for that matter who has acted as a bit of a role model for you? So we're going to start with you. That's okay?
Sure.
And give the minister a chance to think about his response.
On the spot. But yeah, nice to meet everybody. My name is Dan Hobbs. I'm CEO of a company called ProtexAI. So we're actually a US company, but Irish office. We started about 3 years ago. But essentially what we do is we use, CCTV cameras that might be a few around here. We use them to identify danger before people get hurt using AI. So spotting behavior trends that leads to accidents, that companies can stop behaviors from happening rather than waiting for accidents to occur in the first place. So we work with the likes of Amazon and DHL and Procter & Gamble. We employ about 60 people and raised about 20 million to date over the last couple of years. So that's kind of where we came around from. And Kieran's my co-founder. He's over.
And how did you get here? How did you get to that point?
So we had a really funny starting story where we looked at AI before it was cool, not to brag. But Kieran was doing a PhD in computer vision, which is this using cameras and stuff with AI. And we were trying to figure out where could we put that type of technology for good. So we looked at shopping statistics, and we actually tried to create a drone that if your house got robbed, that a drone would dispatch and chase that person for like 2 miles. But that was nearly impossible, so we gave up that dream. And then Kieran's auntie was an operations manager on a site in Ireland, and a guy died. He got crushed by this pneumatic cylinder, and they thought it was a freak accident. But when they went back through the CCTV, they saw that the behaviours that led to that accident were actually happening all the time. So it could have been stopped. And that's kind of where we came around. So it's been a busy 3 years trying to solve that problem worldwide for us.
No doubt. We might come back to this theme that you're working on. Role models. Now, I'm sure you grew up with a poster of Cyrus Field in your room, but other than that,
yeah.
Anyone else you know?
Outside of this room.
Outside of any direct relatives.
Yeah. Trying to think now, does anyone kind of stand out? There's that Matthew McConaughey thing, you have to chase yourself 10 years from now type thing. That should be your hero, but I don't steal that one. But there's a lot of the kind of cool leaders we've been really grateful to meet over the last few years. There's one leader that I kind of do read a lot about is Indra Nooyi. She was the CEO of PepsiCo for a number of years, but she always talked about like learning organizations from the ground up and how you should deal with that. So that's probably someone that I try to mold myself around a little bit.
Okay, we'll turn to you, Minister, and just hear a bit about. I think we know a little bit about what you're up to, but you're new in the job, so just for you to tell us your story. And I mean, if it wasn't enough being a politician and studying law, a medical doctor as well. So you've managed to fit in a lot so far. But I'll just turn over to you.
Thanks so much, and it's wonderful to be here in the great county of Kerry. And just to say to all the Kerry cousins here, commiserations about the All Ireland. And I know it's a county in mourning at the moment, but I've Mayo roots, who again another year that we haven't reached the final and no All Ireland. But it's fantastic to be here. Look, I grew up in West Dublin from parents from the west of Ireland in Mayo, as I've said, and got involved in politics at quite a young age when I was studying law and political science in Trinity, and then started getting involved in Fianna Fáil actually with Brian Lennon at the time, and then studied medicine as I ran for the council. And when you're running for the council, my focus then was was kind of local politics, active representation, and always ambitious but not sure when you'd get the chance, but it came around pretty quickly. So I got a chance to run for the general election in 2016, got elected, and then through that period managed to finish medicine, and then in 2020 was part of the programme for government negotiations, and then became government chief whip and minister for sport and the Gaeltacht at the time. So I was regularly down here actually in the Gaeltacht part of Kerry at the time, and many sports clubs as well. But that gave me a good, I suppose, grounding in government, and particularly as government chief whip during COVID, which was a challenging period with a majority of one at times to actually manage cohesion and a majority during that time. And then when the arrangement switched, where Fianna Fáil held Taoiseach's position and Micheál Martin switched from being Taoiseach, I became Minister of State for Transport. And then as was introduced, Michael McGrath, who was an excellent finance minister and I think will make an excellent EU commissioner, he's now a representative for Ireland to be part of the next European Commission. And I was given the task of being the new Minister for Finance and Deputy Leader of Fianna Fáil, and that's the focus now for the next few months.
Yeah, busy time ahead. So yeah, and as Leonard said, no doubt association with this project is part of what helped to move you to where you are right now. Any role models that come to mind?
It does. I mean, and I mentioned there when I think back about, I suppose, my initial involvement in politics was with Brian Lennon, and as people know, he was Minister for Finance during an extraordinarily difficult time in our country. We had a massive deficit, growing debt, a banking crisis, a financial crisis. And when I think about what he did, and when I saw him personally, my dad was quite close to him at the time, and he was battling a very personal illness as well. Always putting the country first, focusing on the national interest and trying to put the seeds of recovery in place, making difficult decisions on, increasing taxes, changing public services as they were, but again, his focus was always on the future and on setting about a better long-term future for our country. And I think when you reflect on what he said in his final weeks and months, I think there was a BBC documentary. He gave an interview where he spoke. I think the snow was falling down, the IMF were about to arrive, and it pained him to be in that place as finance minister, but it was always looking forward, trying to do the right thing in the national interest. And thankfully, we've had good centrist governments since that have sought to continue to promote that. But someone I grew up with inspired my initial interest in politics, and I suppose in my new role as Minister for Finance is to remember that, particularly in a different economic time now where we're running big budgetary surpluses, but we still have economic risks that we have to manage to make sure what we decide today can be sustained and advanced in the long-term future. And that's my kind of focus, and he certainly inspires my ongoing interest and my perspective in politics.
Thanks. That's a great story, and it's great to hear. I mean, sort of obviously a national figure, but that personal connection as well, and that inspiration that leads you. So we'll come back and maybe pick up on that a little bit more. But Shane, why don't you tell us a little bit about your story?
Sure. Hi, I'm Shane. I'm the founder of a company called Evervault. We are a software company that basically gives companies vaults for sensitive data. So instead of them having all the risk of storing things like credit card numbers or medical records, we give them a vault equivalent to a bank account for their sensitive data. And then we solve a bunch of regulatory problems for them and also try to turn that data from a liability into an asset so they can actually do more things with the data, but safely. And similar to Dan, our company is like a US company, but our employees are between kind of Ireland and the UK mostly, and all of our customers are in the States. So personally, I'm a very grateful direct beneficiary of subsea cables and networking infrastructure. But got into technology really young, again, like thanks to the internet. So I would say in my household, we're a pretty early adopter of the internet. As a child, I was using the internet at dial-up, which at the time was still pretty cutting edge, to be fair. But as I transitioned more towards broadband, I just spent a lot of time in online communities, meeting people that were interested in software and just assumed that was a normal thing. And eventually ended up building just kind of projects and products that were interesting to me, until ultimately I kind of realized that if they're useful for me, they're probably useful for a bunch of other people as well. So got really interested in how do you take something that's cutting edge in science or technology, make it really usable and kind of simple, and then try to get as many people using it as possible to solve real problems. So on the point of role models, one specific example that probably not a lot of people here know of, but he's a guy called Dylan Field. He started a company called Figma, which is basically a way of designing mobile and web applications in your web browser. But what I appreciate the most about all the work that he's done is, setting aside the fact he was very young when he started the company and has had kind of a phenomenal journey, just kind of like the craft and beauty that he takes in, or it kind of approaches in an industry that's generally associated with kind of moving fast, typically skirting rules that shouldn't be skirted a lot of the time, like the famous Facebook move fast and break things motto. He doesn't do that and kind of tries to channel art and beauty into software, which I know sounds a bit kind of kooky, but for us, when we're building something that's low level, kind of hardcore infrastructure that a lot of people might necessarily understand, it's just really important that we communicate it very clearly and it's a joy to use because people won't use it otherwise.
Well, I can hear the passion in your voice and in your eyes as you talk about it, so that's great. Thanks very much. Monika, over to you.
Thank you. So my name is Monika. I'm originally from Poland. So I moved to Ireland when I was 16 years of age, and our entire family relocated to Killorglin in Kerry. So I'm only down the road. So I'm Kerry at heart. But coming from Poland, you can probably hear it from my accent. I've been told I have a Kerry accent, but there's something there at the background that doesn't really make sense. And everyone asks me, where are you really from? So I moved when I was 16. I had no English, so I struggled quite a lot to kind of make that transition. probably a few weeks after arriving to Ireland, when I went to secondary school, they asked me to try out rowing, and I didn't know what the word rowing meant at the time, but I was just like, yes, I sign up for literally anything, just to become part of the local community, and I suppose have a life in Ireland, because that's something that I struggle with, that kind of identity. I was kind of nobody. I didn't have friends. I didn't have anything that I was kind of, contributing, because I couldn't communicate. So that was really, really tough. So then I say rowing found me, and I kind of discovered that passion for the sport, and I really, really enjoyed it. And eventually, kind of with the belief and support of the community and belief of my coach, I managed to progress through the rank. I raced internationally for Ireland since 2013. And then in 2021, because of the pandemic, I got to the Tokyo Olympics. So I raced in Tokyo in the women's pair. So I really enjoyed that experience. In terms of inspiration, I think I have to kind of look close by, because my inspiration is my mother. She's a really hardworking woman. She never complains, and she's the reason why we are here. And I'm very grateful for that opportunity to be able to live in Ireland and to be able to experience all those things that I have experienced. And I will be forever grateful, really, to her.
That's lovely. That's very nice. Thank you. So from the worlds of technology and politics and sports over to the world of acting, tell us your story, Kwaku. Yeah. Apart from your great Canadian connections.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. She is from Canada, and the baby's half Canadian. So quiet, yeah. I'm Kwaku Fortune, and thanks for having us. I'm an actor and a playwright. I started out in acting. I kind of fell into it. I chose marketing in ITT. I didn't know where Tala was. I was from Wicklow. I just clicked OK because I want to be at home. And then I ended up in the Drama Society, and then ended up getting work, and then went to the Lear. So I kind of fell into it. I had a similar thing in terms of the old question, where are you from? You're not really from here, all that kind of stuff. For me, it was always football was the connector in terms of making me feel part of being Irish. And then when I did my knee, that kind of collapsed, and then acting was the next thing that was my passion. So in terms of role models, my big role model is Cillian Murphy. I just absolutely loved him from the start. Corkman, not Kerry, but yeah, still good crack. But I literally watched every single one of his early films that he was coming up, and just his ability and how good he was at crafting accents and just embodying people was just incredible. So he was all, I embarrassed myself the first time I met him really badly. I had a hold of his hand for a good 10 minutes. And I was monologuing how much I loved him, and talking about how he came up in my junior cert, and he had dropped out of college to pursue acting, and I was dropping out of college to pursue acting, and I was just talking, and I realised I still had his hand in my hand. Jesus. Well, nice to meet you. But he's always a really lovely man. So yeah, I think I've answered the question.
You have indeed, and very well. And part of what I'm really struck by is, with all the talent that's here on the stage, is the humility. I think you use the phrase falling into something or rowing found you, but you obviously all worked incredibly hard to get where you are now. And I want to come back to you, Shane, and some of your passion. So we've heard Leonard talking about Cyrus Field, and Ireland, of course, being talked about as being on the edge of the developed world. And today we talk a lot about Ireland really being at the center of what's happening around technology, not only because of the multinationals, but certainly particularly in the area of technology. And as someone who's now working in this area, why don't you tell us a little bit about why do you think Ireland has such strength in this sector, apart from the history? And then what needs to happen to help that survive and grow? What are you experiencing personally in terms of the work that you're doing that's helpful, but also at the pace, that areas like AI really demand?
Yeah, I think a lot of it really comes down to the timeframes you're looking at. So, if you look at Ireland's growth in technology in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, frankly, most of that is down to a really effective IDA who spent most of their time in the States and in other countries convincing companies to open up an office in what was then, and frankly, still is in a relative sense, a small backwater in the North Atlantic. But if you go further back than that, a lot of the kind of most important inventions in technology and science have come from Ireland as well. But I think Senator Buttimer mentioned it earlier on, but most of this kind of comes down to one or two, maybe two people, with just a very deep passion for something. And I think there's a lot of conversation around policy at the macro level or whatever, which is obviously extremely important in the sense of, how are we going to get people jobs? How are we going to grow the economy and so on? But most of these breakthrough inventions do come from kind of one or two people that are just really, really passionate about something. So every 10 years, there is somebody that comes along that's, extremely talented. They're going to put rockets in space. They're going to, reinvent social media or something similar. And the important thing is just that they're able to do what they want to do from wherever they're living and wherever they're growing up, and they don't have to emigrate. I think if you look at software in the last 20 years, there are a lot of great software companies that have come out of Ireland. Some have operated entirely in Ireland, but the kind of media darlings, if you look at Stripe or Intercom or whatever, they're maybe dual headquartered for various reasons. But the general composition of the team is they might have product and engineering in Dublin, but really they're an American company that's sort of operating under the guise of being Irish. So I think the biggest thing is that Ireland is always going to be small. And I think, one thing that struck me when, as we were building out our sales and marketing team is within Ireland, you meet people and they just know that they're going to have to sell internationally and it's just part of the DNA. But even if you look at a place like London, the UK is obviously a much bigger market than Ireland, but relative to the UK, I think if you look at software, it's about 1/10 the size. And they kind of start asking you questions about, or they'll say things like, it's great that you're entering the UK market, or, what do you see as the potential in the UK? And as an Irish company, you just never really think about that. I've always just assumed that we're a global company and, most of our customers are in the US. Whereas in Ireland, people just know, they're not asking you when are you going to expand from the Irish market within technology specifically. So I think there's a lot of talk about whatever the corporation tax changes and all those sorts of things and the impact that's going to have on multinationals in Ireland, which I won't opine on because there's far more knowledgeable people on that. But I think one of the important things is just for the things that are at the cutting edge and those kind of really talented people that come about every few years that are 1 in a million. How do you make sure that Ireland is the place that they do those things? Maybe there's a really talented AI founder in France or in Spain, and they're hindered in France, or not France specifically, but in whatever country they're in, by the rules that slow them down from shipping things. So it probably is a case of Ireland picking one or two industries that we think are deeply strategically important, probably at an infrastructure level rather than kind of an application level, and then just incentivize those people to come over here. Whether it's drones, which to be fair, Ireland are actually at the cutting edge of, with a few companies that have had good treatment from people like the IAA. But within AI, I think we just need to be very mindful about the regulations that come about and making sure that Ireland is flexible and similar to the Shannon Freeport in the Shannon Free Zone in the 1950s. What's the new version of that for whatever thing in technology that we decide is best for us to focus on?
It's great, and it's great to hear that confidence, both from yourself and how you see Ireland, both projecting outwards, but also in terms of what needs to happen here. And maybe we'll come sort of follow this thread a little bit with you, Dan. And I suppose in a way, you could think that when the Atlantic Telegraph Company established its offices here, right here, in this building and on this island, in a sense, it was sort of maybe one of the first FDI companies for Ireland. And certainly lots of success around attracting FDI. I think Ireland's really well known for that. You talked about the state agencies that have played that kind of a role. Certainly a lot of Canadian companies that have come here that Cathorlic spoke about. And so you've got about 50 people, I think, in the company that you're with. What do you see as the challenges trying to create more? And I think the Irish use the word indigenous Irish companies, and how to help those grow. So beyond that kind of automatic expectation that the Irish companies will go global, how do you really make that happen, and how do you help those to grow?
Yeah, I think if you look at going this kind of sort of change point, like an FDI and be categorized that, what does that mean? The grand scheme of things kind of twofold, and what do we want it being? So looking at the way to kind of set up now, it's let's go get other companies from around the world and make them make secondary offices or second offices in Ireland as their hub, and whether that be like shell companies, wherever it may be. But I think we should be looking at another way of like, how do we get people to invest in really, really good Irish people or really, really good Irish companies, rather than the case of let's just bring in money in. Because if you look at the differences between, GDP and national income, there is quite a difference in that regard. So how do we get more people investing in Irish companies? So when we go out for investment and stuff like that, which I know Shane's done as well, is your first port of call is US or London. Usually that's where your starting point is. It's not Ireland. And that's because there's just.
So when you're saying people, you're saying Irish, the Irish to invest here in Irish.
No, I mean getting external companies or external money from elsewhere to invest in Ireland. We've got an awesome ecosystem here when it comes to the people. Like, our workforce is second to none when you compare us on an international level. From people who we're the only English speaking EU country now, but the people that we have here are incredible. We hire as much as we can in Ireland, but at the same time we need companies or money coming into Ireland to invest in Irish companies, and build those indigenous companies to a level where they can compete with the likes of not the UK but with London.
And what do you think helps them to grow here and stay here?
Indigenous companies. I think it comes down to the macro level as well, like Shane mentioned, but also just from a policy perspective, like our capital gains and making it quite attractive. But I think another fold of it as well is just making it accessible for people. Like, there's so many really smart people in Ireland, but on the grand scheme of things, so few people willing to go out on their own and do things. Like, so Irish people, we have this awful glass ceiling complex where you get to a stage, but geez, you wouldn't go past that now. Like, you leave that to the Americans. They're really good at that, or anything like that. But I think we need to get past it. I think we're starting to, but we still have a long way to go. Like someone said, an Irish person is really, really good at something when they tell you they're not very good at it. Which I always think when he's like, geez, I couldn't do that now. I'm very good at it. I wouldn't be like me to do that. So how do we break that? How do we get past that clause of it just being okay with the normal, but let's be okay with being extraordinary, and that's something we need to bridge from a cultural perspective first before we even think about doing it from a wider perspective.
No, that's great. And I mean, I think I hear the confidence in both of your voices, and I'm thinking about Norman Crowley, who was here last year, and I think his talk was really about confidence and Irish thinking about themselves, about yourselves, with all kinds of confidence in terms of what's possible and what's already been done. So, I mean, I can't resist saying, Minister, to feel free on any of those. We're not going to get you to reveal, new budgetary policies or programs that might be, or you may want to preview them here. Why not in Kerry? But I think we'd also like to just maybe take advantage of a bit of the theme of the panel and maybe get you thinking about some of the bigger picture around the context in which Ireland is operating. And we've been talking a little bit about sort of the global uncertainty, the name of the panel here around thinking about Ireland on the bigger stage, but also thinking about this issue around diversity and leadership. And we know there's been sort of a record-breaking number of younger prime ministers, of younger political leaders in many of the stable democracies in recent years. And so I guess the question is, are we increasingly seeing in politics, just like we do in technology, how age and other diversities are really strengthening our leadership capacities? Ireland's been fairly stable in terms of the political landscape. And you were talking a bit about what's brought you to where you are. So you're the youngest Minister of Finance since Michael Collins, and be really interested to know, what do you see as sort of the challenges and your predictions a bit for Ireland's political landscape, just given what you see, but also, I mean, what are the strengths that come from some of the diversity that you represent, including with respect to your age?
Yeah, and I think maybe in stable democracies we have seen, and particularly in an Irish context, we had one of the youngest Taoiseach ever, and we have another one now, and I think that reflects the voting pattern of people. That I think they embrace youth in Ireland, and obviously we still want to strengthen female representation. Is still not where it needs to be in Irish democracy, and even in the recent local elections, whilst there were more female candidates. We didn't see the breakthrough I think we would have all liked to have seen. But that's for the next general election. We've 40% quotas for all political parties, and I'm confident we'll see a better advancement of that. I think breaking that percentage will be important in the context of better gender balance in our democracy. And I think we're seeing that reflected across Europe and in stable democracies. But when you take this year, we've half the world's population is voting across 80 different countries. And that is the biggest, I think, the biggest test of democracy we've seen in many, many years. When you think of the authoritarianism and its grip on the world order more than we've seen in decades. And for me, I suppose, as Irish Finance Minister, we're in a real position of strength right now, but I worry about the short term because what we have, particularly in a European context, I came from ECOFIN and Eurogroup earlier this week. We have obviously bigger European democracies worried about that global order and where the European Union sits within that. And what their response to that is, and their kind of chain reaction, is to have more state aid, more protectionist response. And what that does for Ireland is it undermines our single market. It undermines the enterprise economy we've built since Lamass started that many decades ago. And that puts under threat the ability of our companies and our indigenous enterprises and indeed our multinationals to trade, I think, as the way maybe has been taken as an automatic into the future. And I worry about that because if you look at the wider risks of deglobalization and the fact that trade is under threat when you think of, say, potential Trump presidency, the potentially breaking the existing trade agreements we've seen. And for Ireland's past and our future is all about having a multilateralist, global, open approach to trade, enterprise, and industrial policy. And all of those pillars which have built our economy and built the wealth and the success and have unleashed the innovation that maybe Irish people in the past, the two people I'm sitting beside, would have built their businesses elsewhere because they had to leave. Now they're basing their businesses and the opportunities for the businesses in the heart of Ireland for a place that can operate in a global trading system. So that deglobalization is a serious risk. And how the European Union, particularly around areas like defence and I suppose the disruption that China and the US has brought with the Inflation Reduction Act in the US and the Chinese support for its products and services, that's impacting, I suppose, how Europe sees its single market, and I that's a concern of mine. I think, though, in the medium to long term, when you meet young people across the world and how everyone interconnects and supports each other, I think when you think of the authoritarianism that it kind of overshadows the world we see of today and the threat it brings to democracy, I think in the medium long term we have great hope, and I think that we'll be able to re-establish what's under threat today. But I worry about the short term from an Irish perspective and even from a European perspective, and how, if you think of the growth of the far right in particular parts of European democracies, that's an enormous threat to that open multilateral world order that has enabled people to flourish and businesses to flourish, and particularly small open economies like Ireland.
I can see you're deep in your file, so that's great to hear. And I think you've covered quite a lot in that response. And I think we've sort of talked about globalization in the past as a theme for this event. Maybe deglobalization is a good theme, I think, to think about in coming years. But thanks for that. Anything you want to say around Indigenous Irish business and some of what you're seeing and you're hearing as you take on this new role?
Yeah, I think just interesting from the European meeting earlier on this week, Capital Markets Union and Ireland's ability to embrace that in a European context, I think deals with some of the issues that we identified on Irish businesses having to look to Europe or to look to London or the US for capital investment. And we do have to, I think, reassess our industrial policy on how we can become more attractive for international capital. That's, I suppose, advances and partners with innovation opportunity there, but also even when you think of housing, for example. I mean, our response to the housing being a predominant political issue, obviously the state has to do more, and we are, but we also need to make sure that private capital has a clear role in driving supply there. So kind of a wider discussion on capital markets union and Ireland's ability, like we did with the single market and other European advancement, that we're at a point of being ahead of others as that develops, and certainly with the new von der Leyen Commission, that's a clear priority. We had the letter report on competitiveness, and capital markets union is a big focus as part of the EU's future for the next 5 years, and we need to make sure our financial system is best placed so that people that want to bring innovation and enterprise will be able to capture the opportunities from that.
That's great. That's great. And we maybe try and come back and see if you want to respond to any of that. But we'll just turn to, thanks, Minister, turn to Monika a little bit. And we've been talking about inspiration. And you talked a little bit about maybe some closer to home inspiration. But I wonder if you could just maybe move a little bit further on that and talk a little bit about this issue of Ireland, as some of the other panelists have been saying, about competing on a bigger stage and what that takes to kind of go global, think global, and a little bit what your experience has been in that context, and maybe what more can be done to try to sustain that and grow that success and that sense of confidence.
So I think if we are thinking about sport, we have to remember that success doesn't happen overnight. So it's years and years of that commitment, that effort, and turning up day in, day out, and just keep showing up and work towards that one goal. So for example, if I reflect back on my career, it took me 14 years to get to the Olympics. So from where I kind of discovered the sport and when I started training to having that goal in mind and then getting to the games, it was 14 years of work. Even for Paul O'Donovan to win a medal, he started rowing when he was 7 years of age. So he started very young and then he managed to get a medal. So that success, I think it starts at grassroots, really. I think it's that love for the sport, it's that passion that is instilled in us by the volunteers, by the local clubs. It's that, but also I think the success comes from making sport relatable. So I think just communicating the stories, communicating the successes, seeing the people that are actually achieving it, coming back to their clubs, giving back to their clubs, meeting your heroes, I think all of that fuels that success and shows that, well, if Monika can do it, if Paul can do it, I can do it too, sure, right? So it's just kind of giving that realness to it, that it's not something that is out there and it's not touchable, it's something that can be attained by anyone. So that kind of starts, I feel, very early on. And I think later on, when you kind of progress through the sporting ranks, for example, I think that investment is needed. So let's say once you kind of get to high performance, there needs to be financial investment into that, because it's the boats, it's the equipment, it's the coaches, it's the environment that you need to kind of advance your skill set. But I think that success starts many, many years before it actually flourishes. So I think from my perspective and I suppose experience, what I would like to see maybe coming in the future is that kind of connecting that club level to athletes, that if you do produce an international athlete, there is some recognition to where those athletes came from and there's some sort of reward. Because what I find is that the clubs produce the athletes, but then they leave and the clubs are left with just, I suppose, trying to produce the athletes again, but there isn't any sort of recognition for it. So I think looking back at the grassroots and looking back at the clubs, that's where that investment and I suppose that love for the sport will continue to grow and will kind of advance and bring more people on.
That's a great answer. And I think, actually different topics, but in many ways you're talking about how to keep, what's growing strong in this country. And obviously it's very inspiring to see how well the Irish athletes do for a relatively smaller country. And I think I can relate to coming from Canada, and we're always thinking about how do we keep the talent in Canada not moving south, where it's such a much a bigger playing field for them. So maybe just Kwaku, moving to you with kind of a similar question and thinking about the sector that you're working in, and again, tremendous success in TV and in film, particularly in recent times, coming from lots of hard work and the day in and the day out a little bit. And you mentioned Cillian Murphy. I don't know if that was a plug from Leonard here for Cork, but and he might like to think of it as winning the first Cork winning its first Oscar. But what do you put this success down to on a personal level, or more broadly speaking for the sector that you're working in?
Yeah, I think it comes down to I mean, we've seen some massive productions being produced here, like Game of Thrones, Vikings, etc. But it comes down to a really good crew sorry, I'm a bit splashy. Comes down to a really good crew as well as like talented actors. I think we have an amazing group, an industry of people ready to work in film and TV that can go from job to job to job, highly skilled behind camera, which is great. So, and along with the incredible locations we have, like in the Wicklow Mountains and how picturesque it is, it's just kind of ripe for that. Also, corporation tax and tax write-offs, that's really makes it very attractive. So I think in terms of, that's why you've seen such, I mean, Killian has been doing it, Brendan Gleeson, there's loads of actors coming up and doing it for years. We've always had really talented actors, and I think what's really helped now on the global scale is Killian winning the Oscar, is our actors being in really big productions and being trusted to carry films, which I think is incredible. In terms of grassroots, though, I still think we need, because these productions like Vikings, they come over, and a lot of them are cast out of London or LA, and the big names are usually American or English. They're not actually, the Irish actors, there's a lot of day player work or smaller roles because I think they have to in terms of numbers. So I think going forward, we need more Indigenous stories that really promote, because what we have in the country at the minute, since Paul Mescal, he was in my class, well, man, Paul, since him coming out of the Lear, like the talent, young talent is so like ripe at the minute, and we need an industry that can support that. And I think when you look at these productions, although it's great that they're here and they're using the crews here and it's helping, I think in terms of actors, we need bigger parts that help elevate a career rather than, although it's nice to be a day player on Vikings and get a step up, to really grow a career, you need to be given more substantial work. So.
No, that's great. Do you want to say anything more about Indigenous stories, and what do you mean when you say that?
Yeah, I mean, we do have a culture of producing still really good Irish films, but I think in terms of the pool of money, we need more money and more risk taken on Irish stories, because there's some great films that get a good spotlight, but there's not enough. I mean, Colin Keane was incredible. Like, that was such an amazing run. It went to the Oscars. It was incredible. And we need more at that as a model, and then to be those kind of stories to be, I suppose, like, I want to write, so someone has to fund me. Let's put it that way, yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. And it's amazing to hear you talk, and, you know, just the name brand recognition of so many Irish now that would be, you know, so well known, including in Canada. So I think we've been talking, you know, a fair amount about the here and now and what people have been working on and what's been inspiring you. Maybe we'll come back to some of these sort of technology related issues as we sit here, where the technological revolution began with the creation of what we call the Victorian internet. And maybe come back to AI and come back to things like Chat GPT. And I'm sort of the least equipped on this stage, or maybe in this room, you know, to have delved into this. But I maybe kind of cast your eye to the future a little bit. And do you think these are positive things? You mentioned a little bit about, you know, what we need to think about and worry about. But just give us your thought on, like, how do you think we're going to benefit from this, either in the sectors that we've got represented here or in our personal lives?
Yeah,
I mean, you've given a good story about the genesis of your own company. So
yeah, exactly.
I'm sure you're not going to say no, but tell us a bit more why yes.
Surprisingly, I'm an advocate for AI, which believes. But I think it's a big thing. So similar to like how the cable was this huge revolution. We've had these beautiful revolutions in technology over the past hundreds of years, and now we're sitting in one, which is really cool. And it's such a nice place to be right now because it's moving so quickly. And a lot of people are like, oh, AI is going to take our jobs and yada yada. But one guy said to me at a conference that it's not AI that's going to take your job. It's the person that knows about AI that will be much more competitive in it and becoming comfortable with it. And a lot of people think that AI is just ChatGPT, where you ask it to write an essay for you, or a financial policy or something like that from the bones. I'm sure we don't. But that's the essence of it. It gives you those points. But AI in general is a lot more things. Like, we use AI in cameras, and there's AIs in sensors, and there's AI for film now, and there's AI for all these different things. And what it's going to enable us to do, and think of it as an enabler, is do things faster, do things more with much more accuracy, with doing things that we shouldn't be spending time on, and should be using our brains for much more clinical thinking on that. So I'm really, really excited, especially where we're at now and how quickly it's moving. The AI Act, like Shane mentioned, is something that's coming to the fold, and it's not going to be fully in place until 2025, but we have to get ourselves ready for it, have to get ourselves to a place where Ireland becomes that place where people want to come and build really awesome AI companies for it. So I think we're in a good place. It's a long way to go for sure, but we're moving in the right direction.
You talked about sectors where Ireland should focus a bit, Shane. I mean, obviously, I think it's hard to call AI a sector because it's going to be so pervasive to everything that we do. But do you think Ireland's doing enough? And what's your sense of how positive, or what kind of challenges might be there for us as we embrace what's out there and what's already there?
Yeah, I mean, for AI specifically, in some ways, we're kind of following the IDA 1980s playbook again, where and obviously this is great. OpenAI have opened an office in Dublin. They're hiring a lot of people, presumably some of whom will ultimately be AI researchers as well. And maybe in a decade, they'll go out and they'll start their own AI companies. But the nature of the AI business now is that there was this big kind of step function change in the technology that kind of led to a bunch of new activity where half the world is interested in AI now, and every smart person from college wants to go into it. But we're now back into kind of like a somewhat iterative version where each model is still getting, like 10 or 20% better or whatever, and that's great. But the solution to it is just throwing money at it. And I don't think we should compete in a game where, you have Saudi Arabia putting in hundreds of billions of dollars into training their own model. Like, that's just not responsible, and it's not even clear whether any of the value will accrue to those companies anyway. What I think does make sense is making it easy for companies to just use it to improve their own products, because everyone's talking about all the capital that's going into the models, the companies that are making the chips, like NVIDIA, NVIDIA who design them, and TSMC who manufacture them. But nobody's really talking about like where all this future revenue and cash flow is going to come from. And it's going to come from boring old businesses that are, doing like travel booking or things like that. And that's where the huge opportunity is. There's a lot of dramatic statements saying, it's going to change the world. And, to Danny's point, like, it's going to destroy all employment or whatever in the world. In practice, like, if you're in a knowledge-based job, it's probably you'll be 30 to 50% more efficient, which is great. Like, more productivity is better. But I think, again, people get confused with the kind of ChatGPT version that everyone has seen. It's not just you have a conversation with a bot and like that's what AI is. Where it becomes pretty powerful is you tell the machine to go do something and it just kind of figures out everything to do with it. But the reality is most, like for me at least, most of the places that I spend my energy aren't in actually doing work. It's just your executive function. Like, you have to decide what you want to do in the first place. And if you want to communicate an idea, me writing words or anyone here writing words is already the kind of lowest entropy or like highest bandwidth way of communicating something, and you just end up with more and more noise. So I don't think that's gonna kind of hugely break anything. And then it's basically the kind of analogy I'd use is if everybody here in this room was kind of glued to their chair, they didn't really have any executive function, but they can kind of do activity. Like, if I was a person and I was trying to get all my AI bots to go do something, I still have to decide what everybody's going to do. So I have to think about like, well, what am I going to give 60, 80 people jobs to do? How will that be useful? I'm still going to have to, walk to the hotel to get out of here and whatever else. So I think it's very dramatized, but I think it'll hugely revolutionize existing boring in a good way businesses that are 80, 90 or near 100% of the economy, and definitely 100% of the kind of real material economy.
Well, that's empowering. I'm glad to know we'll still have a role to play as people. So I don't know, Minister, if you want to jump in on this. Is a big topic. I realise that, and I realise that Irish government's done a lot. And Minister Callery, have had a chance to engage with them a few times. including the Senate visit that we talked about earlier around the AI advisory group that the government's put together and so on. So you're looking at this both from the opportunity and also the regulatory side as government, but on a personal level.
Yeah, no, I think
be interested in your observations.
Yeah, well, as someone who studied medicine, always interested in healthcare. I mean, it presents enormous opportunities in healthcare when you take in radiology alone and some of the data and the empirical information out of that. AI assessing X number of scans versus a human eye, and it's much more on the AI side in terms of accuracy. Similarly, we've RNA vaccine development came through AI, and there's so much more around. I think medical technology will adapt and advance, assisted by AI, which is a force for good in terms of healthcare, for example. Similarly, in transport, you've got automation happening. In terms of self-driving and so much more in terms of drone technology was mentioned earlier on. So there's huge opportunities to, I suppose, enhance people's day-to-day experiences in lots of areas of public policy. And I think we have to strike a balance around that. I think initially when ChatGPT was being discussed, it was like an enormously negative reaction where people thought this, doomsday. But I think there is a more balanced perspective on it now. And we need to make sure we strike the balance in regulatory terms on facilitating innovation, embracing it where it makes sense in terms of different policy areas. On the flip side, I mean, we've had a recent Department of Finance assessment on the labour force, as others mentioned, 63% of jobs, existing jobs, potentially impacted by AI. But I think, they could be replaced by those who are more agile or advanced their own ability to do another type of job within the sector. So I think you have to see how that evolves in terms of the future of work. What I would say around democracy and AI's role there, I think there is a risk around deep fake and misinformation, which is a serious risk on how it influences people and biases, and also what's inputted into different AI platforms in terms of a pre-existing bias and how that perpetuates and how it can divide and polarize people. And that is a serious risk to cohesion within society, and to how communities embed and integrate, and how people are channeled into a particular self-enforcing bias, which is as a result of technology, thanks to AI. So that's the downside, which has very serious risks, and I suppose governments and democracies everywhere will have to grapple with that, but I suppose
and work together on it. To come back to your earlier point around the multilateral agenda and so on, I mean, this is where working together to share where we can and we should around public health challenges, but also in areas like disinformation. So yeah, no, that's great. I don't know if either one of you want to jump in on this. You were reflecting to me how you think GPT or AI might have made your life easier when you were first coming into Ireland. So it is fun to look back and think what I could have gotten out of it if it had existed. But
yeah, definitely. To save me many hours of sitting with dictionary and trying to look for the separate words, what they actually meant. But yeah, when I'm kind of reflecting on, let's say, my journey and also the education, like I was in need of a kind of personalized learning experience when I actually moved to Ireland, and I didn't get that. I was kind of thrown to a deep end, and I spent many days crying, feeling sorry for myself until I actually kind of figured it out. So it took me over a year to kind of, I suppose, get into swing of things and learn the language and actually be able to communicate. And Leaving Cert, I had a year and a half to actually do my Leaving Cert, and I was told that was the most important exam of your life, so that put even extra pressure on me. But I remember that was a struggle. So I feel like if there was AI back then, it would make that transition probably a bit easier. So again, in the future, I would imagine that there'll be way more kind of personalized learning experiences for students, but also there's such a huge movement of people around the world. So that would actually make that I suppose, globalization and that movement of people easier.
great.
Yeah, it's interesting listening to Dan and Shane talk, because yeah, there's more of the positive sides, because I think as artists we're definitely more on the fear-mongering, this is the end kind of thing, because in terms of especially writers, how all there's no copyright or anything. The ChatGPT or these AIs can just grab things in seconds from all these sources, and create stuff, scripts especially. So that was what they were working on when the strikes happened in the US last year. So I think it's nice to hear the other side and the good positive things. There's also a big threat. I do a lot of voice acting as well. There's also a huge threat there in terms of copying voices, and we talked about deepfake, all that stuff. Yeah, so I think I have a slightly more positive view, just listening to you guys. But I think this Monika, I have her name here, Anya. I'll try. This screenwriter on Twitter was saying, I don't want AI to do my writing, so I have more time for laundry and dishes. I want AI to do my laundry and dishes, so I have more time for writing. And I think the main thing is that as artists and creatives, that I don't know, we're protected and are still able to pursue our career, I suppose, because it feels like a bit of a threat. I think what they got in the strikes was to like force the studios in some point not to use AI in certain stages, but how far that will go, that will be an ever evolving issue, I think. So yeah, for me coming in here, it was very much like, yeah, I might be out of a job in a few years, because they even talk about this, because they do this thing now in LA in the big studios where they have all these cameras. They do 360 imaging of like actors and extras, but mainly extras. And a lot of what the SAG, the actors were striking against, was the use of that for extras, because they would copy an extra's full image, film them for one day, give them that fee, and then pitch them into the rest of the scene. And if they can do that for extras, then they can do that for actors. So that's where we're coming from in terms of fear. But again, it might be slightly, I don't know, not existential, slightly end of the world-ish. I don't know if it's based fully. It might be led by fear a lot, but I suppose those are the things we're trying to protect ourselves from and our industry, I suppose.
That's really fascinating, and it's an excellent, really concrete example of where those concerns might be quite well founded, in terms of what's at risk. And hopefully, as humans, we have that potential, though, to manage that. We're going to do a final round, and I might just start again in the middle here with Shane and just say, so you talked about looking outwards and Irish companies or individuals. That's a basic starting point, which I think is admirable. If you look out into other countries or international experiences, are there things that you wish you would want to leave kind of us here thinking about what Ireland could do better or more of or adopt in terms of programs, policies, experiences, ways of doing things?
It's a lot. I mean, yeah.
It's a big panel. And you're young, you could take it.
I think a lot of the biggest breakthroughs tend to happen, or can't happen, in a state of stability. And so what I mean by that is Ireland, thankfully, is a very stable, generally safe country that doesn't have too much chaos going on. But most of the kind of greatest inventions in the world have come out of turmoil. You look at like Silicon Valley specifically stemmed from the Cold War, where arguably you could go further back to, if anyone's seen Oppenheimer, the Manhattan Project, and how they basically pulled in all the best physicists and whatever else to solve what was seen as an existential threat back then. I think for us to do anything basically that is kind of material and we think could change the trajectory of the country, you do need to get people more bought in than just like, oh, we should do this or we shouldn't do this. So some way of figuring out how we can have that level of progress and trajectory without actually being in a state of chaos. Although, arguably the Cold War wasn't, was reasonably stable in comparison to other things. But yeah, that's probably the main thing. How do we do that in Ireland? That's not an answer, but it's a thing we should figure out.
No, that's great. And I think sometimes good things do come out of chaos. So I saw your head nodding there. Yeah. What's going through your mind?
I think just kind of what I was saying earlier on the thinking big. Like I do think, I don't know how to do it. I don't think there's something that's going to happen overnight. Somebody say like you have to go back to the grassroots type thing to build this out, and putting the encouragement it's okay to go off the beaten track sometimes. I think just in Ireland we're not great at that. I don't know how to fix it though. So I don't know if lots of things have done in this plot of land to change the world, but I'm not going to solve that right now. But yeah, I think just the ability to think bigger and the ability to attract the best talent to Ireland, because we are good at it, bringing in talent into in some cases, but for smaller companies it's kind of hard. So we compete with like the likes of the Metas of the world or the WhatsApps of the world of bringing in talent. It's hard to house them here. It's hard to pay to compete with the salaries of big companies, which certainly makes it trickier. But if we can bring in really good talent and create kind of what Shane's saying as well, is create areas of specialization and whatnot, we'd be in a good spot for it. But we need people to think bigger first before even touching that.
That's great. Sporting world. Do you see things out there that you say, well, that's a good idea, maybe that could be brought in here, or just approaches as they've been talking about in terms of how athletes are nurtured and supported?
I think when it comes to sport, you always try to keep it simple, especially when it comes to moving a boat. It's about placing a blade and pulling as hard as you can. So like I suppose in terms of methodology, it's kind of just we are keeping it simple. So it's all the kind of additional technologies that are coming in that are telling you how fast you are going and all of that. That's definitely improving. But in terms of the actual concept, I think it kind of stays the same, the concept of moving the boat. But when we were kind of discussing things there, I was just thinking about, again, education. And what I would like to see more is, I work at MTU Kerry, and I was involved in delivering a program to secondary school students, and they were looking at sustainable development goals, and they were solving problems, and they were building them out of Lego. But once I left, those ideas weren't captured. So like, I would really love to see a platform or a program where people can contribute, and it's out there for someone else to take that idea and maybe develop it further, but so that the value of actually sharing and communicating is not lost. So I would like to see advancements in that, and just kind of having that pool of knowledge that you can kind of tap into and get that opportunity to contribute to decision making.
That's great. Kind of in the old days, we would have called that open source. So you start to build off of one another. So that's a great answer. When you look outwards, let's say to other countries that you might have been working in, are there things that you see happening outside of Ireland that you admire, that you think either in other walks of life or in your industry that you think you'd like to see Ireland doing more of? And it could be to support some of these indigenous stories, or it could be to protect and promote some of the areas you're talking about. Or you think Ireland, and if the answer is you think Ireland's top of class, then that's okay. That's a good answer too, because Ireland's doing really well in the sector.
Yeah, I don't think maybe we're top class, but I think we do have a really good industry here. I think what I would like to see personally, in this age where it's content, you have so many streamers, so many platforms, it's push for things. This maybe sounds a bit archaic, but I'd like to actually see a slow down in terms of process, because even when I'm auditioning for things, you see scripts that come across and they're half baked or half cooked. It's all fast because they need to get it out. So I think actually what we need to do here, and I actually don't think it's from outside, I don't know where else would do this, but there needs to be more time, more steps in terms of process in building stories that are ready to go. Because even in theatre now, it's very pressure. We have to get stuff, get it out, and we have to hit schedules for Arts Council funding. Everyone's going for the same pot. So in terms of theatre, I think there needs to be another body, not just the Arts Council, like a Screen Ireland or like Stage Ireland or something where they could feed money from. So we're not all relying on the one pot, because when everyone's going for the one pot, then what you find is the applications are what they're giving money to is all safe. You don't see stuff that is risky, that is kind of representing where we're at as a nation. So I think, I don't know if I've answered the question, but I think going forward, Stage Ireland and then with Screen Ireland, just more time in terms of process, which I think they do, but in not being rushed to produce content. I think we need to respect the process of writing and try to get the best possible script before, because we have all the elements and we have great writers, we have everything here in terms of talent. So it's just, I think we need to take a step back. I don't think that's going to happen, because it is like pedal to the floor trying to fill these spots. I mean, if you look at Netflix, there's like certain things that hit it are incredible, but a lot of it is stuff that is good for 1 or 2 episodes and then just falls off. And I think that, for me, that comes down to lack of respect for process. So I don't know if that's answered it.
No, I think that's interesting, because I think it's think big. Yeah, it's think big, and at the same time, there's a lot that goes into that in terms of doing it right. So I think you're hearing lots of great budget ideas here, Minister. But
invest in theatre.
but I'm going to give you here the last word.
Yeah, well, look,
and answer in any way that you wish
Yeah.
to. But I
No,
think that
I
idea
think-
of thinking big is an interesting one. But also, what do you need to have in place foundational?
No, I think what everyone has said is, is real inspiration from their own backgrounds. I think for me, when you look at it, like we're in the middle of a technology revolution, as others have said, and it's for Ireland to be best placed for that. But we're also in a world that's chasing our ambition around reducing global emissions and climate change, and there's a huge energy revolution happening, and it's to make sure Ireland is best placed to take the opportunities from that. So, and you think of all sectors of our economy want to decarbonize, try and meet a climate or a carbon neutral society, and I think for Ireland, we have huge potential on offshore wind, for example. We've seen a kind of a solar revolution in the last 2 or 3 years. But how do we embed that in our industrial policy to be the leaders globally around innovation? Because that's all going to evolve and change over the next number of years. And it's important that we're, from an infrastructure perspective, that we allow that to happen in the context of whether it's wind energy or transformation of our transport system or a whole other range of other parts of our economy. I think that will unleash the talent of the future directed into areas where we know the world has demand for trying to decarbonize, and I think that's a big opportunity, but also something we have to get better at, not holding the traditional industrial norms that we have. How do we embrace that innovation for the future to try and meet our wider climate goals, but also the opportunities that will come from that?
That's great. And I think actually on this area, I mean, the whole juxtaposition of innovation against process, is an interesting one, because we can't afford to wait too long on that very topic. So I want to thank all of you here. I'm looking at Leonard, but I think we're just at time. And I mean, when we look at this panel and the ideas and what Ireland can do, of course, you are Ireland and you are the leaders, and I'm quite certain that each one of you are going to help to make these happen. And so I think, just the closing words might be a little bit about showing the ambition, that we're really inspired with this conference here with Cyrus Field, and Kohorlik Butimer said, be optimistic in his remarks this morning, and I think we really do have to be optimistic, and we have to have that hope, and then we have to just remain connected. So thank you to these young leaders. Thanks for allowing an old gal like me on the stage here with you, and thanks again to Leonard for putting together this panel. So all the best.